Hi, we are Group 3, and for our project, we created a Twitter word cloud. So the primary objective that we kept in mind throughout this process creating the project was how can we use live Twitter data to make conclusions about society, and specifically trending topics on Twitter based on location and how that correlates with current events.
So initially we wanted to have several parameters such as location, date, by choosing ranges of days, and then in relation to current event we could filter by like COVID, the 2020 election, but a lot of these we weren't able to include based on our timeline and on API restrictions. So like I mentioned, the timeline was kind of our biggest issue. We planned to have 1 week set aside for cleaning, and then the rest of it would be setting up the Shiny app and adding features, but that ended up taking actually 3 weeks cleaning and gaining access to the API. So then we had the last week to actually create the app and add features.
And some other examples of things previously done in this domain is one here, such as Trends 24. And as you can see, there's no color palette, no selection of different locations, and there's also no information on tweet volume. And we took these into account and tied in coronavirus data since it's being so highly talked about right now.
So the main thought process that we went through is that a lot of public policy is based on public surveys, which have a lot of flaws. Like it's proven that people are more likely to take surveys if they have a higher income, but Twitter is a good example of something that provides real-time data at all demographic levels. And this allows us to look at the data in correlation with current events.
Yeah, and so as Maddie said at the beginning of the presentation, it took a long time, specifically 3 weeks, to actually gain access to the API. So at the beginning of our processing, we had to take a sample file in the JSON format that sort of resembled the data that we'd be getting through the API. But once we actually gained access to it, we were able to use the get trends function from our tweet and to extract the data that we wanted, and the select function from Dippler to extract the desired features, such as trend and tweet volume.
So now we will show you a demonstration of our final app. So as you can see, the default word cloud is for the whole world, and the most popular trends show up the largest. And if you hover over them, you can see the word and the tweet volume. So if you go over some of the smaller ones, you can do this easier. We also have a slider at the top, which you can limit the number of words that show up on the word cloud. So you could look at maybe the top 10 words. We also have word clouds for the whole US, as well as each of the 50 states. So here is Virginia, for example. We also have a reference, a visual reference for users, so they can see the impacts that the coronavirus has had on each state. And as you can see by the key here, that New York has had the most amount of cases, and this is reflected in their word cloud. As you can see, since COVID-19 is very large and some of the other terms relating to that, we can tell that this has been something that is greatly talked about on Twitter in the state of New York.
And then here's an example of our app from a couple days ago during the NFL draft, and it just shows that depending on what's going on around the United States, the app will respond accordingly. So this is of New York, for example.
So some other uses for this app that we created beyond just public policy is it also can be used to look at demographic differences from state to state. So for example, like Sydney was talking about with the NFL draft, Alaska's word cloud remained essentially the same when the NFL draft started, whereas other states like New York and Pennsylvania, they had their word clouds completely changed. And then beyond that, we can look into social media movements and things like politics. So for example, right now the hashtag dropout Biden is very prominent in heavily Republican states, whereas Biden's campaign can look at things like swing states to see if this is a concern in those states. And these are just some examples, but obviously there are a lot more that it can be used for. And we're happy to answer any questions you guys might have.